You have $650 million. And nobody knows, not your neighbors, not your friends, not the guy at the diner who has poured your coffee every Tuesday for 6 years and still thinks you work some ordinary management job. Nobody knows. And the strange part? You want it that way. Most people spend their lives trying to look rich. You spent yours trying not to. Right now, someone is posting photos from a rented Lamborghini. Someone else is standing beside a private jet they don't own. Another person is buying designer clothes on a credit card that already keeps them awake at night. Meanwhile, you're standing in a hardware store holding a bottle of drain cleaner. And somewhere in your inbox is an email confirming that your net worth has quietly crossed $650 million. No celebration, no fireworks, no champagne, just fluorescent lights and a decision about plumbing supplies. That should feel impossible, but it isn't. Because the people who actually build enormous wealth often don't look anything like the people pretending to have it. And that's where this story begins. Not with a breakthrough, not with a genius invention, not with a startup, not with Bitcoin, not with Wall Street. It begins with something so ordinary that most people would have walked right past it without a second thought. A vending machine. That's it. A dusty vending machine sitting in the corner of a hospital break room, the kind nobody notices until it's empty, the kind people kick when it steals their dollar, the kind most people see as furniture. But one afternoon you looked at it differently, and that single moment changed everything. The machine was out of water. Someone standing beside you muttered a complaint and walked away. Most people would have done the same, but something stopped you. A question. A small question. One that sounded almost ridiculous. Who owns this thing? You didn't know it then. But that question would eventually be worth hundreds of millions of dollars, because while other people were focused on the product inside the machine, you became interested in the ownership behind it. And ownership changes everything. That night after work, you sat in your apartment with an old laptop balanced on a kitchen table. Rain tapped softly against the window. The room was quiet, no grand ambition, no business plan, no dream board, just curiosity. 40 minutes later, you had your answer. A small local operator owned the machine, nothing impressive. A guy running a handful of machines around town. Most people would have stopped there. You didn't. You kept reading, and then you found the number. The machine earned roughly $80 a month after expenses. You stared at it, $80. Most people would laugh at that. $80 wouldn't change anyone's life. But something happened when you multiplied it, 5 machines, 10 machines, 25 machines. Suddenly, the number wasn't the point. The structure was. For the first time, you saw money behaving differently. You saw income that didn't require your physical presence. You saw a machine quietly solving a tiny problem for strangers all day long, and every time it solved that problem, money appeared. Not a lot, but enough. Enough to matter, enough to scale, enough to become dangerous if ignored. That night, you barely slept, not because you were excited, because you couldn't stop thinking about a possibility most people never see. What if wealth wasn't built by chasing big opportunities? What if it was built by owning thousands of tiny ones? And once that idea enters your mind, it's very difficult to get rid of it. The first machine wasn't impressive. In fact, if someone saw it sitting in your garage today, they'd probably assume it belonged in a scrapyard. The paint was faded. One side had a dent. The card reader worked only when it felt like cooperating, and every time you looked at it, a small voice in your head asked the same question. What if this is stupid? The machine cost $900. To some people, that wasn't much money. To you, it was. Not because you couldn't afford it, because you couldn't afford to waste it. There is a difference. When people imagine successful investors, they picture confidence, certainty, bold decisions. But the truth is much less glamorous. Most successful investments begin with doubt. Lots of it. The seller met you in a storage unit on the edge of town. He was retiring, or at least that's what he said. You suspected he was simply tired of restocking, tired of maintenance calls, tired of driving across town because a machine ate someone's dollar. You inspected the machine for 20 minutes, pretending you knew what you were looking at. You didn't. Not really. You were learning as you went. Eventually, you handed over the money. The seller loaded the machine into a trailer. And just like that, you became the owner of a vending machine. The drive home felt strange. There was no celebration, no applause, no confirmation you had made a smart decision, just traffic and uncertainty. That night, the machine sat in your garage, Silent, heavy, motionless, 1,000 pounds of metal and doubt. For 3 days, you couldn't find a location. Every place said no. Office buildings said no. Gyms said no. Apartment complexes said no. One manager didn't even let you finish your sentence. Another laughed. Not cruelly, just politely, the way people laugh when they think you're wasting your time. By the end of the week, rejection started to feel normal. Because it was. Nobody tells you this part. Everyone talks about entrepreneurship after it works. Very few talk about the 100 small moments where it almost doesn't. Then on a rainy Thursday afternoon, something changed. A dental office manager agreed to meet. The office wasn't large. 3 dentists, a waiting room, a small employee break area, nothing special. But unlike everyone else, she listened. You explained the arrangement. You would install the machine. You would maintain it. You would share a percentage of revenue. The office risked nothing. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she shrugged. Sure, why not? 3 words. That's all it took. 3 words that quietly altered the direction of your life. The machine was installed the following Monday. You remember standing beside it after everyone left, looking at it, waiting, as if money should immediately start pouring out. It didn't. Of course it didn't. The first week was painfully slow, a few drinks sold, a few snacks, nothing exciting. Every evening you checked sales. Every evening disappointment followed. At the end of the first month, the machine generated $280 in revenue after products, after fuel, after the office's percentage, after everything. You kept $190. You stared at the number. $190. Your cousin had recently received a signing bonus larger than that. A coworker earned more than that working overtime. A friend spent more than that on a weekend trip. And yet, you couldn't stop smiling. Because the amount wasn't important, the proof was. Someone bought a drink while you were asleep. Someone bought a snack while you were at work. Someone solved a small problem. And a portion of that value flowed back to you. Not because you were there, because you owned the system. That realization changed everything. Most people spend their entire lives selling time. 1 hour worked, 1 hour paid. The relationship is direct, simple, predictable. You had just experienced something different, a tiny glimpse of leverage. And once you see leverage, it's difficult to look at the world the same way again. Suddenly, every business looked different. You stopped seeing products, you started seeing systems, you stopped seeing customers, you started seeing ownership, restaurants, parking lots, car washes, storage units, laundry facilities. Everywhere you looked, someone owned the machine behind the machine. Someone owned the process. Someone owned the boring infrastructure nobody talked about. And that's when the obsession started. Not greed, obsession. The desire to understand how money moved when nobody was watching. Over the next 18 months, you added a second machine, then a third, then a fifth. Nothing happened quickly, no overnight success, no viral moment, no breakthrough, just small deposits, month after month, each one insignificant by itself, but together they created something more powerful than income. They created confidence, confidence that the architecture worked, confidence that boring could be profitable, confidence that the path nobody wanted to talk about might actually be the one worth following. Then one night, while reviewing numbers at your kitchen table, you noticed something unsettling. The machines were making money, but they weren't making enough. Not for the life you wanted, not for the freedom you imagined, not even close. You needed a bigger engine, a bigger asset, something that could scale, and that's when you discovered a tiny laundromat for sale in Ohio. The owner was a retired postal worker named Dale. The asking price was $47,000. The books were a disaster. The equipment looked ancient. The building smelled like detergent and old concrete. Every rational person would have walked away, but hidden inside the mess was something nobody else seemed to notice. The cash flow was real, and what happened after that purchase would become the most important decision of your entire life. The listing had been online for 97 days. That alone was enough to make most investors suspicious. Good businesses rarely sit unsold for long, especially profitable ones. So when you saw the laundromat in Ohio still available after more than 3 months, you assumed there was a catch. There usually was. The photos weren't helping. Half the fluorescent lights looked burned out. Several washing machines appeared older than some college students. The folding tables were scratched. The floor tiles looked tired. Nothing about the business screamed opportunity. It looked forgotten, which was exactly why you couldn't stop thinking about it. The asking price was $47,000. cheap enough to be interesting, expensive enough to matter. You called the owner. A man named Dale answered. His voice sounded exactly how you'd imagine a retired postal worker to sound. Calm, patient, unimpressed. You asked him why he was selling. He laughed, not because the question was funny, because he'd answered it 100 times. I'm tired. That was it. No dramatic story, no hidden tragedy, no secret opportunity, just tired. 3 decades of opening and closing the same business, 3 decades of fixing machines, 3 decades of collecting quarters, and now he wanted out. A week later, you drove 6 hours to see the place. The neighborhood wasn't wealthy, working-class families, small houses, local diners, auto repair shops, the kind of area most investors ignored. As you pulled into the parking lot, your first reaction was disappointment. The building looked worse in person. A faded sign hung above the entrance. Several windows needed cleaning. A trash can overflowed near the back wall. Nothing about it looked like a future fortune. Dale was waiting inside. Gray hair, baseball cap, work boots. He shook your hand and gave you a tour. The machines rattled loudly. The dryers looked ancient. The vending machine in the corner had probably been there since the early 2000s. At first glance, the place felt like a mistake. Then something happened. Customers kept walking in. A mother carrying 2 laundry baskets, a construction worker, a college student, an elderly couple, then another customer, and another, and another. The machines never stopped. Wash, dry, fold, leave, repeat. For 2 hours you sat quietly watching. Nobody knew who you were. Nobody cared. But what you saw changed everything. The business wasn't selling washing machines. It was selling necessity. People needed clean clothes, not wanted, needed. And needs behave differently than wants. Needs survive recessions. Needs survive inflation. Needs survive trends. Nobody wakes up and decides they no longer require clean clothes. That realization hit harder than any spreadsheet. Back in Dale's tiny office, he handed you his records. Calling them records was generous. Most of the numbers lived inside spiral notebooks. Receipts were stuffed into envelopes. Some expenses were handwritten on sticky notes. Your accountant would have a heart attack. But underneath the chaos, a pattern appeared. The business was generating real money, consistent money, month after month, year after year, even during difficult economic periods. You spent 3 nights reviewing everything, running calculations, looking for problems, trying to convince yourself not to buy it, because every investment you've ever made feels safer when you find reasons to avoid it. The trouble was, the numbers kept surviving scrutiny. The laundromat wasn't exciting, it wasn't innovative, it wasn't scalable in the way tech investors talk about scaling, but it worked relentlessly, predictably, quietly, and eventually you realized something uncomfortable. Most people weren't avoiding the laundromat because it was a bad business. They were avoiding it because it was a boring business. There is a difference. People love exciting stories, exciting investments, exciting possibilities. Boring cash flow rarely gets attention, and attention is often the enemy of opportunity. 3 weeks later, you wired the money, $47,000, the largest investment you'd ever made. The moment the transfer completed, panic arrived, real panic. The kind nobody posts about online, the kind entrepreneurs experience alone. You suddenly noticed every possible problem. What if the machines failed? What if customers disappeared? What if utilities increased? What if the lease wasn't renewed? What if you had just made the worst financial decision of your life? For several nights, you barely slept. Your brain turned every uncertainty into a disaster. Then the first monthly report arrived. Net profit, $3,127. Nothing life-changing, but real. The following month, $3,284. Then $2,991. Then $3,415, not identical, but remarkably consistent. The business kept doing exactly what it had done before you owned it. Customers kept arriving, machines kept running, money kept flowing. For the first time, you experienced something powerful, income disconnected from your daily effort. You weren't getting paid because you worked harder. You were getting paid because you owned an asset. That difference changed your understanding of wealth forever. Most people focus on income. Wealthy people focus on ownership. The distinction sounds simple, but it changes everything. By the end of the first year, the laundromat had generated roughly $38,000 in profit. Friends suggested celebrating. You didn't, because something else had happened, something more important. You had become addicted to the architecture, not the money, the system, the realization that ordinary businesses could quietly generate extraordinary outcomes over time. And once that idea takes hold, you begin seeing opportunities everywhere: parking lots, storage facilities, car washes, billboards, service companies, the invisible infrastructure underneath everyday life. Most people walk past these businesses without noticing them. You started studying them obsessively. Then one Tuesday morning, while attending a county tax auction almost nobody else bothered to attend, you spotted something that would eventually become one of the most profitable purchases of your entire career: a municipal parking lot, and the room had absolutely no idea what it was worth. The county tax auction started at 9 a.m. By 9:30, most investors had already left. The remaining properties were considered boring, small, and unimportant. Then a municipal parking lot appeared on the screen. Nobody bid. Nobody seemed interested. The lot wasn't beautiful. It wasn't exciting. It was just asphalt. But while others saw a parking lot, you saw something different: cars, lots of cars, every single day, people parking, paying, leaving, repeating the process over and over. The starting bid was $31,000. You raised your hand, silence, no competition, sold. For weeks, you wondered what everyone else had seen that you missed. Then the first monthly numbers arrived. The lot generated steady cash flow with almost no effort, no inventory, no employees, very little maintenance, just cars coming and going month after month, year after year. That single purchase taught you a lesson most investors never learn. The best opportunities often look too boring to notice, and while everyone else chased exciting investments, you quietly bought another parking lot. The county tax auction started at 9 a.m. By 9:30, most investors had already left. Then a municipal parking lot appeared on the screen. Nobody bid, nobody seemed interested. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't exciting, just asphalt. But while others saw a parking lot, you saw cash flow, cars arriving, cars leaving every single day. The opening bid was $31,000. You raised your hand, no competition, sold. For weeks, you wondered what everyone else had missed. Then the first month's numbers arrived: steady income, minimal maintenance, almost no involvement. The parking lot quietly paid you month after month. That purchase taught you something important. The best opportunities rarely look exciting. And while everyone else chased trends and headlines, you kept buying boring assets. What you didn't know yet was that one phone call from a retiring business owner named Frank was about to change everything. You start the engine. The laundromat will open at 6 a.m. Karen will send another report. Marcus's restaurant will be busy at lunch. Life will continue exactly as it did yesterday. Nobody will know what happened in that plumbing aisle. Nobody will know a quiet collection of boring businesses has grown into $650 million, and maybe that's the point. Because the people who look wealthy often spend their lives performing success. The people who become wealthy spend their lives building it, quietly, patiently, one ordinary decision at a time. The vending machine, the laundromat, the parking lot, the billboards, the cleaning company. None of them looked extraordinary, but together they created something extraordinary. And as you drive home in the same Honda Pilot with the same crack in the bumper, you realize the greatest investment was never the money. It was learning to see what everyone else ignored. The performance of wealth gets attention. The architecture of wealth creates freedom. And now there's only one question left. What are you building, and who are you building it for?